And now we'll look at photography and its invention and a brief history of it and some of its uses. So here we have a Ansel Adams Moon and Half Dome Yosemite National Park. Of course, Ansel Adams, kind of the godfather of landscape photography. So, sort of a history of photography. And part of all of the history of photography is almost like mad scientists in a way, where they're playing around with all these different chemicals, different sort of contraptions that lead to photography as it all comes together in the 19th century. But well before that, the camera obscura, dating back to the Renaissance, is basically originally a sort of light, tight room with a hole in it so that everything outside the room would project onto the far wall. And then, during the 14th century or so, they're playing around with some chemicals. You start getting the chemical that basically have silver nitrate, and they discovered that it darkens under sunlight. And so there's a lot of playing around with it over the years, basically ways to try to make it more stable. So holography is one of the early methods of photography. The daguerreotype, the daguerre basically becomes the standard of black and white photography, and then shortly after, in England, we get the negative coming about, and then portrait photography becoming popular, and shortly after, photojournalism and photography as an art form. So artists taking up the camera as a tool. So the camera obscura, and here's sort of a portable camera obscura. So as you can see on the left side of this box, there's a lens. So light, everything on the outside, travels through the lens onto the mirror. Reflects off the mirror for the artist to trace it. And the early camera obscura dating back to the Renaissance was basically to help artists figure out linear perspective and to create more believable 3D spaces. So here's sort of a large scale camera obscura. It says, this case, a giant room with the holes in the walls and stuff outside, projects on the inside of it. And Morel has sort of a history of going around and creating camera obscuras in different locations. So here, a hotel in Paris, where he has transformed the hotel room into a giant camera obscura. And reality, this is what the camera obscura would have been similar to during the Renaissance period, although they probably would have had a little more control over the image, but you get kind of the idea. So that across the street from the hotel is this other building that's being projected onto the wall of the hotel. And so early photography, how it used to work back with there was celluloid film. So you had the camera where you take pictures, develop the film, take the film, cut it into little smaller strips, put that in the enlarger. So light shines through the negative, projects the image down on the little bottom where you'd have your paper. The paper goes in the chemicals, the developer. So that's what starts all sort of the reaction to everything, starts to help the image to develop, basically. The stop bath stops the developing, and then the fix basically kind of kills any and all sort of chemical reaction that's taking place in this. So that's kind of the basics of film-based photography. So in 1829, Daguerre came up with the daguerreotype, and basically used thin sheets of copper with the silver nitrate solution, which is black and white photography. And because the early days of photography, you had no negative. Cameras were basically a little box with a magnifying lens on it. They didn't have compound lenses. So as Daguerre, perfected his process, over the next few years, in some respect, not a whole lot changed in it. Just kind of made the chemistry a little bit better and a little more stable. So here we have the Boulevard de Temple, 1839, and in it there is a first. There is said to be a first that took place in this photo, and it's simply down there in the lower left is a man getting his shoe shined. He stood there long enough through the exposure, which I believe the exposure for this photo was like 10 or 15 minutes, I believe. So the man was there long enough getting his shoe shined to be in the exposure. So the drawbacks would be, there's no negative. Because it's just sort of a single lens in these cameras, the image is flipped upside down and left to right. Of course, you can always fix the upside down by once you're done with the photo, you just flip it over so that it appears right side up. But there's no way to fix the left to right flipping just yet. Compound lenses are not quite available at this time. So then, roughly the same time up in England, William Henry Fox Talbot is playing around with the negative. And so he's able to, create a negative image. So it's a reverse looking image that he can take this sheet of paper, put it on another photosensitive sheet of paper, and these, the early ones were set out into the sun for a few minutes, and so that you get a positive print after that. What we're normally used to seeing with photography is the positive. And then as time goes on, basically the chemistry, gets better. Cameras are slowly getting better. The exposure time slowly starts to get better. Where you're just a few minutes. Some were even getting into seconds. So portrait photography becomes quite popular simply because it's faster and cheaper than having your portrait painted. Uh, and also, today we always think about portrait photography, family portraits, wedding portraits, all this other stuff. So in a way, kind of like printmaking, photography also has a commercial aspect. So the idea of, portrait photography for some kind of gets away from any type of artistic creativity and is pretty much straightforward, uh, what we typically think of portrait photography. However, photographers like Julia Margaret Cameron, she started to get a little more artsy and thinking a little more about composition and her exposures and things like that. So you still have kind of a creative art side coming in with it. And then getting into landscape photography. So Richard Russell, Crow Camp, 1910. One of the things that happens with photography is now there's this invention to be able to go out and visually record things as they are and realistically as they are, as opposed to having to draw or to paint them. We're able to record visual history rather easily. And so a lot of governments hire photographers, go out and start photographing uh, what's around us, go out and start photographing the landscape. In the United States, it's, as the westward expansion, go out and photograph what else is in America. Part of it's go photograph and find railroad routes. Do survey. Where are we gonna have to build bridges or dig tunnels and things like that. At the same time, what all do we have in our country? Over in Europe, they're like running around taking pictures of the historical sites, the historical buildings and things like that. So it's like I said, there's this tool to start recording things visually. So getting into photojournalism, the sort of good and the bad with photojournalism. So Dorothea Lange, Migrant Mother, 1936, on the left, uh, is of course a migrant mother, that's going around during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and Dorothea Lange spent some time and finally convinced, to be allowed to take a photograph, but the mother didn't want the children's faces to be photographed, which is kind of good because this sort of became the poster child of suffering America during the Great Depression and the whole Dust Bowl that took place with all the crop failures and things like that. Um, so that after this photograph became published and kind of ran wild, the lady in the photograph felt that she had sort of this unwanted kind of celebrityism, where she was just trying to, take care of her family, and next thing you know, she's like, she can't really go anywhere without being recognized and being bothered. And so the Singh photo on the right, basically over in India where you have the still have a high poverty rate. So this is kind of showing the uh, essentially a lower the lower class family and how they live. So photojournalism is, it says, documenting, bearing witness. As they say, the photo never lies. The photo tells the truth. Photo's worth 1,000 words. All that can go with it. So now with photography were able to capture these moments and share these moments with the world. The unfortunate part, like the Dorothea Lange, is they can be, obviously taken out of context and skewed. So while we talk about things being photoshopped and all of that today, you know, photography's been skewed and misrepresented almost since day one, unfortunately. And so photography as art, Alfred Stieglitz, one of the early pioneers of American photography, where he founded his group Photo Sessions, and basically it was artists coming together to uh, use photography as a tool, as opposed to using clay or metal for sculpting stuff or paints or printmaking. The camera was the artist tool, so photography is the medium that they were going after. Uh, and so some of his work, like the steerage, it's kind of sort of documentary photography in a way. He's wanting to record this moment, record this event, and at the same time, he's kind of show you sort of the duality of life. So down in the bottom part of the photo is the steerage class, basically third class, but steerage, I guess, kind of sounds a little better than saying third class. Up above is the first and second class, and some of them are kind of looking down and sort of like the people in the steerage class are there for the first class's entertainment. Uh, you know, which in Europe, I mean, that's sort of what happened. Uh, so, why families would come over here, they would want to escape that. And so here, Stieglitz in New York City, constantly seeing all these boats coming in full of refugees, or maybe not necessarily always refugees, but immigrants wanting to come over here to start their life new, have a whole new life, figure out a way to live the American dream. Um, but yet the people up top kind of looking down and staring, it's like, sort of the oddity, and it's, like I said, they're sort of there for their entertainment. So Stieglitz really wanting to point out this sort of difference between the social classes. And Henry Robinson fading away. So looking at this for just a bit. Done back in 1858. So that Henry Robinson basically composing his photograph much like a painter would compose a painting. So a lot of the sort of art photography mimicked the narrative of painting. You could put a painting and a photograph next to each other, and they would have, a very similar feel and appearance in a way. Of course, the photograph would be black and white, painting would be in color, but still, there's sort of the composition and all that they would just be almost identical. One of the other things with the idea of photo manipulation and all of that, Henry Robinson's photograph here is actually from like 7 different negatives, so he would have cut and paste or used masks and dodged and burn so that he could create a final negative so that he could make the copies of this photograph. Each person was photographed at a different time, and with the exposures and all of that, it would be pretty much impossible to photograph people sitting indoors and still have sort of the details of the clouds and the window. That would be pretty much impossible to do without some type of photo manipulation that Robinson was known for. So carrying on with some of the ideas, back to Ansel Adams there, Autumn Tree against Cathedral Rock on the right. Um, so one of the things Ansel Adams starts to bring in is more sort of a hard edge, modernist ideas to photography, where some of the photographers slightly before him would have been sort of kind of the softer edge. There wouldn't be much the sort of kind of blatant contrast that you get from the tree and the rocks behind it. Um, and then on the left, Cindy Sherman, Untitled 123. For her, where she's composing the photographs, often her photographs are referred to as having the narrative of film, so that you're getting this little quick slice of a much bigger story. So for her and her photographs, where she's trying to figure out this character she's going to portray and the setting that's going to be uh, that the photograph will be, what type of clothes, what type of props, how's the lighting going to be, and then of course, Cindy Sherman in her early days being the college student without much of a budget, she was, photographing herself. So that's kind of something that's always stuck with her work is that, 99% of the times she's the one in the photograph. Uh, so like I said, she's picking the characters and the clothes and the settings and props and things like that for her photographs. There's kind of a lot that she sort of uh, puts into them. And then some other dealings with photographs that we talked about before with painting. Where does collage belong? So Hannah Hoch, Cut with the Kitchen Knife, 1919. Dada piece. So collage is with photography because she used photographs. Next to it, Man Ray with one of his rayograms. And simply doing a rayogram is taking your sheet of photographic paper, putting it under the enlarger with no negatives, or just exposing raw light down onto the paper, and then setting objects on top of the paper to block the light. So, Man Ray playing around with a bunch of little, putting objects and things like that down on the paper. Of course, anything that might be kind of reflective or a little bit of a translucent, a little bit of light coming through, or that doesn't sit quite flat on the paper, you're going to get some kind of crazy, funky effects with it. And then getting into digital photography, Andres Gursky, Shanghai 2000. So with digital photography, it becomes kind of a blessing. You don't have to worry about all the harsh chemicals and things like that. Everything's saved to a disk. You can view your images almost immediately. Delete the bad ones. If you have a decent little photo printer, you can print out your own. So kind of like when I was talking about having your own desktop print lab, same thing you could do with photography. Nice, decent, high-end computer. They can handle all the software and everything, and a decent printer that can, print the high-resolution images. So the Gursky Shanghai photo, it's actually three different uh, images that he put together, did all the editing, made it, seamless so that you can't tell that it's three different photos, hiding all the edges, laying all these three photos on top of each other so that they appear as if you have this you know, unheard of crazy uh, view range with the camera that, technically this sort of view that you get inside this, uh, hotel tower is, it's impossible to actually get it with a camera, uh, but it would seem like you're able to get it simply because he did the photo editing. So that is it for photography. Next, we'll get into film, video, and digital.